Shalom Aleichem, welcome. So this morning, I had given one of my children my phone to hold. And I said to the child, I said, hold my cell phone. And then I went to their car door and I closed it because I was coming around to the driver's seat and I hear the guy screaming, no, Ima. What happens? I told him, hold my phone. He decided to put the phone in a compartment on the door. Now, the problem is, normally that would not be a problem at all. It happens to be we were driving one of our bigger vans, a 15-passenger van, and that little compartment is made for nothing more than receipts. Because when it touches the door, it smashes straight into the glove compartment, and it keeps everything very nice and snug so you never lose any of the receipts. The problem is when you put a cell phone there, suffice it to say, I now have many, many, many cell phones, or more like many, many pieces of cell phones. And it was very interesting because my child felt very, very guilty. And I explained to him, I said, I'm actually not upset that my phone's broken. It happens. Phones break. Okay. For me, it's a day off. So everybody's busy texting me. I'm supposed to be calling everybody. And it's radio silence. I love it. It's amazing. I really like life without a cell phone. I have to tell you that. What I was really upset about is I told you to hold my cell phone. I didn't tell you to put it somewhere. I didn't tell you to improve what I did. I simply gave you very clear instructions and you didn't follow them. And that's what made me upset. And my child's big enough to understand, and I obviously don't want to let him go to school feeling guilty or sad, so we wrapped it up. But when he left the car, I was thinking to myself, this is literally what happens for sure a whole year, but Erev Pesach specifically. My mother called me a few years ago and she said, don't tell me you eat rice on Pesach. Like, if you need to make it for your husband, okay, I understand. But for sure you don't, right? And I said, Ma, let me tell you, I for sure don't eat chametz. Everything else, don't ask me about. And I'm looking at this season where, we're sitting here, we're going to be learning now in a relaxed, comfortable environment. There are women literally who are slaves today. What do I mean by slaves? They're on the floor with toothpicks and toothbrushes and Clorox, cleaning out the grit and the grime because they have no understanding of when Hashem said, 7 days you should eat Pesach, Korban Pesach, you should have matzot. That's what he said. He didn't say now spring clean. He didn't say now drive your family crazy. He didn't say become OCD and neurotic. And you should know that for me was the most frustrating feeling, where I told my child something very clearly and he didn't listen. I was thinking how much it must, not only that we don't get brownie points for the extra, how much it must bother HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I gave you a Torah. It's so easy. It's so simple. It's so clear. And you don't stop making it so complicated and inaccessible to the rest of the Jewish community, because every single year you come up with new craziness. Every single year in the name of God, you come up with greater and weirder and harder things, so much so. I have some family members who this year have opted to go to these, they call them the Pesach getaways, right? For those of you unfamiliar, the Pesach getaway, it's an 8-day Pesach program. By the way, sometimes with terrible reviews. You always see after Chag, they brought them all the way to Italy and they ended up in the swamps and there was no food. One year they had a video of this lady screaming and throwing food because they said it was non-kitniot, and then she ended up eating a bean. So these getaways cost thousands. We're not talking about 1,000. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. So if you're ever looking for business, this is the field. But I always marvel, why is somebody willing to pay for 1 week, 10,000, 15, 20, 30? You have a family of 5. Why are people willing to pay millions? Because we've turned Pesach into something so absolutely ludicrous that people's sanity is really on the line. And if it's between my sanity and paying $50,000, I'll pay $50,000 to go somewhere. And we have done something absolutely crazy. We have taken a holiday that is supposed to be the most beautiful, joyous holiday, similar to Sukkot. Everybody loves Sukkot. Sukkot is festival, it's lights, it's happiness. Pesach was meant to be the same, minus the bread. Literally, that's the difference. Everything else is the same. And, it was a very important lesson for me this morning. The anger was not because my phone is broken. It's I told you something, and you didn't listen. You thought you knew better. And I think it's an important lesson for us, which Again, we sometimes feel this complex to people who seem to be doing more of, they're better, they get brownie points. If one day I'll be like them and as holy as you. And the answer is no, that is not holy. If Hashem didn't tell you to do it, it's not just not good, it's bad. And we have to be more vocal about it. We have to be more vocal because the people pay the price for the insanity. Is he the leader who decides that this year we're going to have a new minhag about what kind of meat to buy? He doesn't pay the price. In fact, he benefits from it. It's the poverty-struck person with 13 kids who suffers. And that's why we have to speak up. But that's my lesson about my phone this morning. So thankfully, my husband was kind enough now to come to help me. We have everything here arranged. But I wanted to talk to you about something else. I did not want to talk about Pesach cleaning. What I did want to talk about is the origins of our nation, why it's important for us to understand where we come from, how it influences where we go, and specifically what our connection to the land of Israel is. So those are the three topics I'd like to cover. I want to use the Haggadah as our soundboard. So for those of you who can, if you can't, take out any Haggadah. It could be the Maxwell Haggadah. It can be whichever free one you got at the shopping mall. You can find it online. Now you should know that the Gemara has an extensive amount written on Pesach. In fact, I was looking now for Pesachim 116a, and there are 3 volumes that Art Scroll put out. So it tells you there's a significant amount on this topic. I recommend you take the time, even for those of you who never really learned Gemara. Some of it is, you have to be a little more advanced, but some of it's really readable and really interesting. For example, you'll see there are more than just 4 questions on Manishtana. There are multiple rabbis that say, well, why is this different in many variations? How it got codified and then put into the Haggadah that today we use, that's a really good question and a rabbit hole that you may want to jump down and share with us. But if you would like, you can open up to first Masechet Pesachim. We want to look at Daf Kuf Tet Zayin, which is going to be 116. And there are always 2 sides, so it's going to be Amud Aleph, which is A. Go all the way down to the last paragraph. The rabbis are having a conversation. When we start telling the story of Mitzrayim, the Jews left Egypt, where do we start telling the story from? You always have this. There are some people who, there are stories upon stories upon stories until they finally get to the point you lost them by story number 3. And then there are some people, I have this especially with students. Some of them, it says you have to hand in a 10 to 12 page essay. They could barely scratch 5 pages because they write very concisely. Yeah? So the Chachamim are having a conversation of, when we're talking about telling our children the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, where's our starting point? So I'm going to read to you the last paragraph. I'm just going to be mindful of the time. Okay. So it starts, the final section of the Mishnah begins, Matchil bignut u'misayim b'shevach. Where do we start the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim? We start with the Jewish people's disgrace, and we end up with their glory. What does that mean? My bignut, what does it mean to start with the narrative of the Jewish people's disgrace? So of course, because it's a Jewish text, we have 2 opinions. Rav says the following. Rav Amar, we're going to start with the disgrace. Literally, we're going to go back to the ancestral side of the Jewish people and talk about our great-grandparents. Mitchila ovdei avodat glilim hayu avotenu. You want to talk about the Jewish people's disgrace? First, we're going to start off our origins, our history, our roots, who we are, where do we come from? We come from a nation that was built on families of idol worshippers. People believed in rocks and stars and suns. Can I ask you to mute yourself? Thank you. Shmuel, on the other hand, says, no, we're not going back all the way there. Rather, avadim hayinu. You want to know where the story of Exodus starts? You want to know where Yetziat Mitzrayim starts? It starts with the disgrace of a nation being able to go into captivity, going into slavery, staying there for 210 years under the most harsh environmental conditions, That's the disgrace we're talking about. Now, if you look into, so that's the Gemara. Where do we start? When we're talking about the story, and this is really important. When you want to understand who you are and where you're headed, you have to be able to go back and look at where you came from. Our past is not something that shackles us as much as links us to where we come from, who we are. In fact, the Navi Yirmiyahu says, Hen am lo alman. The Jewish people are not orphans. We're not somebody off the street who you'll ask them, well, where are your parents from? I have no idea. I need to do Ancestry on me, what 23 and me. We know who we are. We know where we come from. We know where our ancestry is from. And I want to talk about two different sides of it. So number one is going to be Rav, which is, okay, our ancestry is a bunch of idol worshippers. And the second one is slavery. So look with me at the Haggadah, if you can. You'll find after we have the four sons ask their questions, the paragraph that starts mitchila, yes? So in response to the four questions that the children ask, let's look for a second at the questions. Right? The question we have, ultimately, they're all the same question, which is, why are we doing this tonight? Right? Why are we celebrating Pesach? They all ask it in different variations, and it's interesting that the variations really matter. The language, the tone, really do matter. The presentation matters. Right? But really, the ultimate question is, why are we doing all this? What does all this mean? What is the significance that, God willing, on Monday night, we are all going to be sitting in our homes, making a seder, practicing half royalty, half slavery, eating weird foods, doing interesting minhagim, all this to prompt the question of, tell me why. Tell me why. So this is in response. I want to look at the paragraph mitchila. Yes, mitchila, so in the beginning, Ovdei avodah zara hayu avotenu. Our ancestors were idol worshippers. And then what happened? Va'achshav, and now, kirvanu hamakom la'avodato. Hashem has handpicked us, chosen us, to be His nation, to get the Torah, to come live in the land of Israel, and to be a light unto the other nations. Shenemar, like it says, Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am. Yehoshua, when he's speaking to all the Jewish people, says, Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael. Right? This is what Hashem has told you. Be'ever hanahar yashvu avotechem me'olam. I'm now bringing you back to the land of Israel. Don't think that our history started in 1948. It also didn't start in year 2488, which is 40 years into the Jewish people being in the desert. Yoshua turns to the people and says, you've been here before. You are not colonizers. You are not European imperialists. You are not stealers of land. You are coming home. You are indigenous people to this land. I believe that the Jewish people, we are horrible at marketing. What do I mean horrible? The other side, which is a bunch of liars, markets their lies with incredible truth. We who actually have truth, unfortunately, don't know how to represent it. We didn't come to Israel in 1948. We didn't need Israel because of the Holocaust and we had nowhere to go. Because if that's true, then Uganda would have been a really good idea, right? You know that was on the table. So if it was just about a homeland and a piece of property, it would have been great to send the Jews somewhere that wasn't inhabited. Our history didn't start in 1948 or 1967 or 2024, nor did it start in 2488. So we're talking about when the Jewish people, 40 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim, Yehoshua turns to them and says, Chevra, you are not strangers. You are not coming now to conquer a land that wasn't yours. Terach, let me tell you a little bit about your history. Let me tell you who you are. Terach, Avi Avraham, V'Avi Nachar. Who are they? Vayavdu Elohim Acherim. They served other gods. Ve'kach et avichem et Avraham me'evar hanahar. Ve'olech oto b'kol eretz Canaan. And you have this mutual choosing where Avraham Avinu is in search of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu finds him and says, you're going to be mine. Come with me. Come with me to the land that I will show you. And not only will I show you, Va'arbe et zaro, ve'ten lo et Yitzchak. And I promise you I will give this to your children. Who are your children? Avraham has 2 children. Yes? Who are Avraham Avinu's children? Very good. Avraham has 2 children. Now, many people, especially Jewish, we like to say, yeah, but he didn't really like Ishmael. It's not true. How do you know it's not true? How do you know that Avraham Avinu really did love Ishmael?
Because he asked to said to Hashem,
Yafeh mod. Because you could lie to people, but you can't lie to God. You understand? Avraham Avinu really loves his child. He also has very big struggles with him, which is why ultimately he cuts ties with him and sends him away. By his wife's beckoning, not by his own. In fact, you find that when Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, Kachna et bincha, right? If you look at the Rashi, he says, okay, but I have 2 sons. Et yichidcha, your only son. He says, yeah, but they're both only children. The next, what does he say next? Very good. I see you mouthing it, Aliza. Asher ahavta, that you love. And Avraham Avinu's response is, but I love them both. Avraham Avinu loved Yishmael. Then Hashem says, Asher ahavta et Yitzchak. So we know that Avraham Avinu has 2 children. But when it comes to promising the land of Israel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ki bi Yitzchak yikare lecha zara. You want to know every time I say your children, who I mean? It's very clear. Ki bi Yitzchak yikare lecha zara. Yitzchak will be your offspring, and Yitzchak's offspring, ultimately you find Yitzchak getting the same promise, which is it will then go to Yaakov, the Shefatim, and then what we know as the Jewish people. Yes? Ve'ekach et avichem et Avraham me'ever hanahar. So Hashem, your grandparents, they worshipped idols. They worshipped foreign gods. I took Avraham, I brought him to the land. I told him I will give him children. Ve'eten li Yitzchak et Yaakov et Esav. Ve'eten le Esav et har Seir, lareshet oto. Ve'Yaakov uvanav yardu Mitzrayim. Before you can understand the inception of your nationhood, you have to understand the origins. And I think this is really important because we live specifically in a Jewish community that is very ugly when it comes to looking at people's origins. What do I mean? So there are movements to make people more religious, to make people more observant, to make them more fill in whatever the blank is, whatever organization. The problem is, the moment you take somebody, and by the way, there was once a synagogue here that one of the complaints they had to us was that we steal people. And I told the rabbi, I said, we actually can't steal people because people are not objects. People go where they want. Surprise. People are not collateral damage. People have brains, people have hearts, they go where they're welcome, they go where they're wanted. You can't steal a person. The only time you find that people were actually taken is when the Kohanim were consecrated to work in the Bet HaMikdash. It says, V'henif et HaKohen, right? And they had to pick up the Kohanim. More than that, you never find that. But you have whole movements who are willing to steal your children, convert them into being something different, and yet they will never accept where the person comes from. They will never accept, but this is somebody's daughter. This is somebody's son. Just because they've now chosen a different path from the family, whether it's through the path of conversion or becoming more observant, how could you then take these people and literally cut them off from the source that they come from and expect them to be healthy, functioning, happy human beings? We know that the damage that is done, even when necessary, when children are removed from their homes, whether they're put into foster care or long-term care, we do it with a tremendous amount of caution because we know how damaging it is to remove people from their family. Even parents that are not good are sometimes better than the best outsider. Now, God forbid, I'm obviously not talking about neglect or abuse. But we have full movements that not just encourage, but actively make sure that if you join our club, you must sever all ties from the people who gave you life, from the people who've sustained you, from the people who've put you on the good and healthy path. And it's not just ugly, it is so dangerous. If you're looking to control people, it's a very wonderful thing to do. But if you're actually trying to create healthy, happy, normal human beings, it couldn't be more damaging. You see, if the Torah was written today, half of Bereshit would be cut out, because all the stories about our families really make us look bad. If Avraham Avinu was trying to get married, he would never make it in the religious Jewish community. His father's an idol worshiper. His brothers are crazy. Take his son. He's married to Hamas. I mean, we're looking at craziness. Yaakov, yeah, he's a really good learner. He sits in Lakewood all day, but have you met his brother? You know, he wears jeans and he smokes a little and he works. You know what Esav was? And yet we live in a not normal society where it's perfectly normal to, one, tell people to completely cut off their past. Number two is to shackle people because of where they come from. To shackle them in ways instead of saying, wow, so look at you. You're an individual who, where you come from, and I guarantee you, because where we come from inspires who we are. In the end of the day, a human being isn't born in a vacuum. So you met somebody at 24. There are 24 years of layering that created this human being. Yes, it might not be the path of Torah mitzvot that you decided they should be on. But they come from somewhere. At the very least, they deserve to be respected. Certainly not mocked. And even more so, they shouldn't have to pay a price. Why is it their fault? To the contrary. You look at Avraham Avinu, and I'm telling you, on a shidduch resume, it would be, you know what they would do in the religious community today? They would bring him and parade him around to give all the inspirational speeches. Wow, look at this Baal Teshuvah who has been on a journey, and he's so amazing. Come listen, it's incredible. We're going to serve sushi, and you're going to be able to hear the trials and tribulations. I know how these flyers work. And yet when it comes to, okay, do you want to marry him? Do you want to let his children into your school? Do you want to be neighbors with him? Well, you know, they're a little different than us. They're not our type. We want our children to be around the same kind of... What kind of two-faced liar are you? There's a whole movement that's actually called Dor Sheni. Dor Sheni means second generation. What is second generation? There's a whole first generation of people that were inspired to become observant. Because the truth is, if you find the Torah, you fall in love with it. Then you find the Jewish community, and you find how ugly it can be. Dor Sheni are the children of people who have joined the Jewish community, and their children. The children who, you see, the dad doesn't understand that the only reason he never gets an aliyah is because he's not good enough. But his child, who already grew up in the community and understands the subtleties, knows exactly how they're mocking his dad. They know exactly why they're making fun of the mother's accent because her Hebrew isn't pronounced properly. And the second generation is really hurt and really angry, and rightfully so. Because they are being treated not like second-class citizens, like third and fourth and fifth. And last week we read about Parshat Mitzorah, about the lepers. And instead of being accepted, put on a pedestal, you decided to join this crazy country club? We always say in our community, when my children say, you know, why should we be Jewish? I don't know, I was born into it. You know what I'm going to send them to? I'm going to send them to the people who decided actively to say, I love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want to join the Jewish people. Because the converts, they should be on the pedestals of the Jewish community. Yet these are the people who willingly decided to join this club. I don't know why you should be part of the club. Ask them. And yet how many converts are terrified to say, me? Please don't say Ben Avraham Avinu. Please don't say, please, I don't want anybody to know I'm a convert. Why? Because I don't want to be persecuted. Because I don't want to be hurt. Because I don't want to be shamed. Because I don't want to be doomed for life to singlehood because of what? Because I have the same ancestry as Avraham Avinu? And I think that the Jewish people, we talk about leaving Egypt, we haven't even begun. We haven't even begun. Because if we want to understand what an exodus looks like, what a nationhood looks like, we have to first understand we come from somewhere. And our past is not something that shackles us. It is something that inspires us. It is something that links us to somewhere. And it's something that we need to be able to accept. We need to be able to understand. And we need to be able to share with pride. I think there's another part to it. Very often people have the other problem. They're so tied up in the past, they never live in the present. Now you should know this happens a lot with elderly people. Why? It's very simple. I used to go to the nursing homes every Shabbat when I was single, and it's hard. Nursing homes are curses. Yes, obviously there's a need for them, and I don't judge people who put people in nursing homes, but really it's like a jail. It's like a prison where the doors are open, but people can't walk out. You have a little extra money, so maybe they give you a little nicer care, but in the end of the day, and you could YouTube this, the abuse, the neglect that happens, because people know this is a waiting room for everybody to die. And unlike babies where they're cute when they gurgle and they vomit and they need to be changed, elderly people is not the same thing. It's much harder. But you should know I found tucked into these nursing homes the wisest of people. Because these are people of society who they don't need to impress anybody. I once asked my grandma, I said, Bubby, why don't you hang out with any of your friends? She said, how can I hang out with my friends? They're all in the cemetery already. Right? When you get to a certain age, that peer pressure, it goes away. And there's a certain amount of wisdom there. The challenge, there's a tremendous amount of boredom and sometimes active pain and suffering. And as an escape, you find a lot of times the elderly people really live in the past. They'll share with you stories of when they were 20 and they were 30. And why? Because the present is so difficult to live in. It's much easier to get lost in the past. We learn about the Jewish people. Yes, we started with idol worship. We're the children of Terach, if we're the children of Avraham. But guess what? Avraham Avinu made a choice. He said, I want to stop what my family's been doing, and I'm going to take a different course. And ultimately, that's what makes him Ha'ivri, the contrarian, and the father of Yitzchak and Yaakov and us, the Jewish people. His ability to say, of course, my past influences who I am. It doesn't bind me. This is not a death sentence. Just because I come from somewhere doesn't mean that's where I have to stay. Dr. Twersky would always say, even if you are what your parents made you, it's your fault if you stay that way. I'm going to repeat it because it's such a brilliant line. Even if you are what your parents made you, it's your fault if you stay that way. At a certain point, you become the adult in your life. And it doesn't mean that they were right. And it doesn't mean that they were good. And it doesn't even mean that there shouldn't be justice brought to the table. Simply, as an adult, you have to then make the decision, but it's my life. I don't want to be a victim forever. I want to move to the second half, which is Shemuel says, no, let's talk about slavery. Why? Tell me what slavery mentality is. What is that concept?
A slave is actually free of any responsibility
How so?
because he can't make decisions for himself, and people, the owner makes decisions for him. Doesn't control his time or outcomes.
It's very interesting because on the one hand, the slave seems to be free in the sense of he has actually no responsibility. He has nothing in the decision-making process because all decisions are made. Yes? And yet the freedom of spirit is what's enslaved. The ability to be a thinking human being is what's enslaved. We were also once slaves. We were slaves in Egypt for 210 years, so it's not for a day. We talked about Pesach cleaning. Pesach cleaning is a piece of cake, even if you're doing it in the craziest OCD way, in comparison to what we went through in Egypt. Yes? Think of the concentration camps. That's what it was, just in Egypt. Yes? Slavery, there are places in the world that slavery still exists. That's the truth. But thankfully, we live in a world, where we're post the Civil War. I can't tell you we're post racism. We're not. But do we have active slavery in the United States? No, we don't. Yes? Are there disparities? Sure, there are. Is there more work to do? Absolutely. But if you ever read books, you don't have to go so far. Read books of the origins of slavery, the early years of the founding of the United States. It is brutal. We're talking about the brutality is beyond comprehension. That's what we had for 210 years. But you know what happened? Hashem saved us. Then we left. And part of the leaving process is not just to physically leave the land of Egypt, but to leave the mentality. Because when people are victims, very often they stay with the victimhood way into their future. So much so that they never actually go free. It could be 10, 20, 30 years later, and they still live enslaved, entrapped. So what kind of freedom is it really? And the Jewish people, we had to go through this process. Why? I can't tell you. I can tell you it was part of the plan, because if you look at Parshat Vayera, right, you have the Brit. Tell me. The Brit Ben. Tell me what I'm talking about. Avraham Avinu is commanded by Hashem to take... Yafeh. The Brit Ben Habtarim, Avraham Avinu is commanded to take different animals, cut them up, put them on pieces. It's quite graphic. Smoke comes down. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu, Yadoa teda, you should know, Ki ger yazaracha be'eretz lo lahem. I am going to tell you what the future looks like for the Jewish people. They're going to, va'avadum, v'inu altam, 400 shana, v'gam et hagoy, dana, right? They're going to go into slavery. There's going to be some kind of process that needs to happen where the Jewish 70 souls need to go into Egypt and come out as a nation. Why we need that process? It's a really good conversation. But that's what's going to happen. But when the Jewish people are going to leave, V'item li'am segula, you're going to go from 70 souls entering the land of Egypt to an entire nation. And as a nation, the transition has to happen from we are now slaves to Paro to we are servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we have to have the ability to say, you know what? Yes, we were here 210 years. Yes, we commemorate it every single year. In fact, every single day we remember this. But just because we have a memory of it doesn't mean we're trapped in it. To the contrary. To the contrary. I think you see this a lot, where people go through life experiences, and the fact that they've gone through challenge can do two things. Either it breaks them completely and they never recover, or they are resilient and they bounce back, and it creates a much more compassionate, kind, understanding, wise person. Now, I can't tell you why two people could go through the same thing. But it's something very important, which is everybody goes through life challenges. That's part of life. Life is never going to be smooth sailing. If it is, you're for sure going downhill. But part of life is our ability to say, you know what? I'm going through stuff. What do I want to do with that stuff? And if I can't do it on my own, so there are good people to reach out to. But the fact that we bump into challenges is not why we then become and stay victims. We use it then to inspire and inform. Okay, so now how do I deal with other people? In fact, we know, the Torah tells us, we have to be nice to the converts. Yeah, we have to be nice to the citizens who joined the Jewish people. Why? Ki ger hayitem be'eretz nachriya. Because we as the Jewish people, we were once then. I always marvel, again, I look at a Jewish community that we sometimes market ourselves as white European imperialists, when it's not true. We're neither of those descriptions. Not white, nor imperialist, nor European. Yeah. We should, if anybody should understand communities that have been hurt, that have been vulnerable, that should partner along for equality and justice and goodness and kindness, that should have been the Jews. Yes? Because we were once you also. We understand. We understand what it means to be living under an oppressive regime. What we do with the oppression is the difference between was it worth it or was this all for naught? And I want to look with you at the Haggadah for a minute, at the second part, which is Tzei Urmad. So if you turn after Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah, oh, you have the Brit Ben Haptarim here. Okay, so if you look at Tzei Urmad, right? It starts off, go back, go look at the origins. Let's go, Vayered Mitzrayim. Okay, so first it talks about Lavan wanting to kill Yaakov. So the Haggadah walks us through the process of how did we get down to Egypt? Yes, how did we get to Egypt? We know there was a famine. Ultimately, Yaakov sends his sons there. We find Yosef, the tribes of Israel move down. We settle there, and we end up staying. Then what happens? Look 3 paragraphs down. Vanitzak el Adonai Elohei Avotenu. The life in Egypt gets unbearable. What do the Jewish people do? We cry out. We finally reach out. The moment that we feel we can't anymore is actually the moment HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "Die, it's enough." I think there's something very important there, which is very often people are struggling, and they struggle so much that they forget to ask for help. The Jewish people are drowning in their pain and suffering, so much so that initially it says, "Vaye'anchu." They simply sighed. They didn't even have time to stop and breathe. They sighed. Over here you find this tremendous pain. They cry. I'm looking, Chani, you're holding a little baby. Babies instinctively cry. Why? Because they have needs. So unlike adults who can articulate our needs, if a baby didn't cry, we would never take care of them. Not because we're bad people. Simply, there's always something else that needs to get done. Give me a minute, and 10 minutes later, you still didn't feed the baby. So what does the baby intuitively know to do? It cries. We have to have the ability as Jewish people, especially I'm talking about now during all the chaos that's happening to the Jewish people. Very often you'll hear the sentiment of, what could I do? So I'll pray. That sentence normally is that I can't do anything. Prayer is doing something. It's not the only thing we need to be doing. There are a lot of actions we need to take. But crying out is something critical. You ever go to the Kotel? You ever go to... In Israel, people are much more authentic in general. So people laugh louder, people cry harder. I remember when I was in my old Bet Knesset in Jerusalem. It was Yom Kippur. And this is an Ashkenazi Bet Knesset, Hasidi. So part of the liturgy, they were saying, Unetanet Tokef. I cannot tell you what it sounded like in the ladies section. You know, when they say they used to hire by funerals, yilalot, women who would just weep so they would get It was this collective crying. And I remember in my heart feeling this, wow, I've never seen this in Brooklyn because everybody's too prim and proper and very individualized space. There was this collective, we're trying to pray. We're trying to get our feelings out. We're trying to verbalize it. It was something very powerful to be in a crowd of women who are unafraid to vocalize the pain, the suffering. And I think it's something that sometimes we don't do enough of. So it's not about crying, and this is important. It's not about crying to the wrong people. You understand? The Jewish people do not have to cry to the other nations. They don't need to see our weakness. We don't need to go begging for alms from other countries. And if they don't want to fly Israeli flags, that's okay. We don't need it. Thank you very much. Yes? We're not a pity party. That's not the Jewish people. Thank God the Jewish people are strong. We have a nation. We have HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But part of this whole operation is we have to have the ability to cry. We have to have the ability to shed tears. When we stop shedding tears, it's when our humanity gets lost. Now, I'm not telling you have to do it, but this is what I do. From the beginning, backtrack. There's this one individual, God should bless her. She sends me emails every single day, lists of Tehillim and people who are dying and need. And I have to be honest, the first few months, not now, this is like 20 years in. So the first few months I would respond to all her emails. Today I don't even look at them, I just delete them. I don't have the heart to look at 40 Tehillim names every day. I really don't. I can't. It's just not something I'm capable of feeling. And it made me start feeling callous because I would just look at the list and it didn't even do anything to me. But at the beginning of the war, I said, there's one thing I do want to do. Every single soldier that dies, at the very least, I want to see his face. I want to see her face. I want to read the description of the humanity of who is it that put their life on the line for Am Yisrael. I want to shed a tear because I don't want to lose my humanity. Now, again, I'm not telling you you could do it. Everybody has to know their capabilities, and that may be too much. That's the truth. There are some days I really don't want to see the pictures, actually, because my heart is so broken. But there's a part of humanity, and you have to find whatever it is where it cannot get lost. It cannot be that we become so accustomed to this chaos that it doesn't affect us anymore. That's the Vanitzak part. If you continue 2 paragraphs down, it says, Vayotzienu Adonai miMitzrayim biyad chazaka uvezroat netuya. Hashem takes us out of Egypt. And it continues. Why does Hashem take us out? What's the point of going out? So we said, okay, before we could talk about the going out of Egypt, we have to understand where did we come from. Where did we come from? 2 places. 1, we come from a long ancestral line of idol worshippers. 2, we come from slavery. We come from an oppressed people who were then taken out, chosen to be a nation. But why? What is the purpose of all this? So I want to find the answer with you actually in the Chumash, because that's my favorite book. I told you, I always go back to the Tanakh. If you open up your Tanakh, look at Devarim. Vav. So this is going to be in Parshat Ve'etchanan. It's going to be chapter 6, verse 25, Pasuk Chaf He. Let's start by Pasuk Chaf. Yeah, we have 5 minutes. Again, Devarim Vav, Pasuk Chaf He. Chapter 6, verse, let's start with 20. Ki yishalcha bincha machar. Yes. Now this is written when Moshe Rabbeinu is about to die. Yoshua is going to take over and lead the Jewish people back into Israel. Ki yishalcha bincha machar. Your son, machar, meaning in the future, is going to ask you, Ma ha'idut va'chukim va'mishpatim asher tziva Adonai Elohechem etchem. Notice this is what the Chacham says in the Haggadah, right? Your son is going to ask you. So in the Torah, there's no 4 sons. There's 1 child. It's interesting. Yes? I think it's something interesting to note. Over here, there's 1 child. Over there, how we got 4 children, I don't know. You have to figure out who split it up and why. Your son's going to ask you, what is all the significance of all the symbolism? What are we doing? All the commandments, why? Why be Jewish? What does it all mean? Why all these laws and regulations? Why? V'amarta levincha, and you should tell your son the following. Avadim hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim. We were once slaves. We were once not an independent nation. We were an oppressed people who were under somebody else's jurisdiction. Vayotzienu Adonai miMitzrayim biyad chazaka. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in His kindness, in His mercy, in His compassion, He took us out. He took us out of Egypt. Vayiten Adonai otot umoftim gdolim v'raim b'Mitzrayim. He didn't just take us out, but He flexed His power to show Egypt, don't mess. Don't mess with my people ever again. Votanu hotzi misham. Why did He take us out? Okay, so it's nice that He showed Egypt and the rest of the world. And if you look at the whole Chumash, Parshat Va'era bo b'shalach, it keeps repeating leman tedu, so that the world should know, so that the Jewish people should know that I am God. What was the point of taking out the Jewish people? ואותנו הוציא משם, למען הביא אותנו לתת לנו את הארץ אשר נשבע לאבותינו. There are three reasons. It's a three-step process. I want to explain to you how it works. The Jewish people come to Egypt as 70 souls. We leave as a nation. So the leaving of Egypt is the creation of the Jewish nation. Yes, we became V'item li am segula, and you will now become an exclusive nation. That happens by Yetziat Mitzrayim. V'item li am segula im ha-Torah, with the Torah mitzvot, happens when? Tell me what happens 7 weeks later. Very good. 7 weeks later, we go from not just being a nation, a people, we now are a nation that is given the Torah. And really the next step should have been what? Because 3 days later, where were we supposed to go? Thank you, Khani. The Jews were supposed to go home. The process of building a nation, right? If you get like Build-A-Beer, so this is the formula of how do you make a Jewish people. One is first you create a nation, then you infuse it with the Torah, then you take them to their homeland, and you root them there. Yes? It's very important to know this process. Because first we were a nation, and then we got the Torah. And nobody can ever tell you that your nationhood is not good enough based on your observance. Because even God didn't believe that. You understand? First we were a people, and then we were a people of a book, and then we were a people of a book and a homeland. And those three cannot be separated. You understand? This is a threesome that has to go together. Kucha b'richu v'oraita v'Yisrael chad hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, the Jewish people, the land of Israel, they're one. It's not disparate parts. It's one body. It's one soul. That's what makes us the Jewish people. ואותנו הוציא משם למען הביא אותם לתת לנו את הארץ אשר נשבע לאבותינו, to the land that he promised our ancestors. ויצוונו אדוני. Guys, can I have 5 minutes? Yep, okay. ויצוונו אדוני לעשות את כל החוקים האלה. Why did he bring us to the land of Israel? I promise you it's not because it was the best real estate in the Middle East. In fact, he didn't even put one oil hole there. Yeah? It wasn't because of the neighbors. I could tell you that either. Not the best real estate if you're looking for a good neighborhood. Why did he bring us home? ויצוונו אדוני לעשות את כל החוקים האלה, so that we could come and do the Torah, לירא את אדוני אלוהינו, לטוב לנו כל הימים לחיותנו כיום הזה. Hashem brought us there so we could live there, so we can thrive as a people. וצדקה תהיה לנו כי נשמור לעשות את כל המצווה הזאת לפני אדוני אלוהינו כאשר ציוונו. And it will be for us good if we follow the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we follow the Torah and mitzvot in the land of Israel. Why did we talk about this whole story? For this. Because there's purpose. We come from somewhere, we're going somewhere, and we have very clear directions of how to get there. It's really not so confusing. It's really not so convoluted. It's a really simple story. Now, I understand if people who are not part of Am Yisrael complicate the story for us. It makes sense. How should they know the story? If they tell me that Israel's really not mine, I get it. They don't really know my story. They don't know my ancestry. They don't know who I am, where I come from. But when we get our story wrong, that's really confusing to me. When we're sitting in fill in the blank outside of Israel, and we're saying L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya, and we have absolutely no plans of ever going to the land of Israel, that's really confusing to me. When we say Kol dichvin yet, we invite everybody, come and eat, only if you wear this kind of head covering, and only if you keep this kind of kosher. So I open my doors to everybody because you're part of my nation. But now I became God's secretary, and I'm vetting you all based on my arbitrary things. That to me doesn't make sense anymore. Because when other nations do it to me, it makes sense. They don't know. But this whole story is very clear. We come from somewhere. Were we created to be something? And this is how it happens. And I think Pesach is a time to realign ourselves. And I've been listening on Instagram and TikTok, and I know that Pesach has turned into this self-help holiday. I'm all for self-help, by the way. I really am. I don't say this mockingly. I think that it's really, really good to be able to take big ideas and say, okay, how do I personally apply it? Right? So we talk about our personal Egypts and getting out of our... I think those are really important concepts to talk about. But before we get to that, really the story of Pesach is the story of how a nation is born and what it's supposed to do and where. And if those things are not in place, at least in our minds, then we have to shift them. If I don't understand what it means to be part of a nation, so then I have to figure that out better. I need to do more research. If I don't understand what the Torah and mitzvot has to do with my nationhood, okay, so then I have to explore that. I have to understand when we talk about letaken olam, I'm going to fix the world, we always forget the second half of the sentence. What does it say? Very good. At least I'm reading your lips. You know, I think it was President Bush when he was campaigning. He said, read my lips. There will be no raise in taxes. And later when he raised the taxes, all the newspapers said, oh, we read his lips and he was a liar. But Aliza is not a liar. Yes? We have to learn Torah and mitzvot. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the books. It's not that complicated. We know when we read what an aleph, what a bet, what a gimel. Again, I'm not worried about the outsider who messes up my text. I worry more about the insider who starts convoluting and complicating and making gibberish out of what's something so beautiful, what's so correct, what's so pleasant, what's so pure. And the last part, so we had the nationhood, we had the Torah, the land of Israel. We cannot divorce ourselves from our homeland. We cannot divorce that part of being a functional, healthy nation is we have to live and have our own sovereignty over there, our own autonomy. We have to create a functional community that has room for all the Jewish people and even the non-Jewish people who want to be citizens, because there is room for that. We have ways to make that happen. We have ways to create a functional society where Jews and non-Jews alike can live together. It's not an exclusive country club we're looking to create. But first we have to reclaim it for ourselves. First we have to understand very, very clearly. You know, in America they have this song, this land is your land, this my land from California. Yes, you know the song? This land's a land that belongs to me. Chevra, we're going through a war now. And I would love to tell you that by the time Pesach's over, the war will be over. I don't believe that. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be a much longer war than we would like, and the price is going to be a much higher price. But at the very least, we can't have our head waver. Well, should the Jewish people be there? Shouldn't the Jewish people? The Jewish people have to be there. The Jewish people not just belong there, but more than that. And I want to end with this. If you look into Bereshit, Rashi quotes from a Yalkut Shimoni. Yes, so he quotes from the Yalkut Shimoni, 187, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So if you look at really, it's the first pasuk. Look at Bereshit Aleph. What does it say? Bereshit bara Elohim et HaShamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, Hashem creates the heaven and earth. And the obvious question is, we know the Torah is not a history book, so why do we need all this historical background? Yes, if you look into Rashi, again, he's quoting the Yalkut Shimoni. I want to read it with you. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Lo haya tzarich להתחיל את התורה, אלא מהחודש הזה לכם. If this is just a legal code, we could have started from the first commandment, which is in Parshat Bo. Yes, from Rosh Chodesh. Why do we start here with, well, first Hashem created the world. This was how he created it. The land, the sea, the stars, the animal. Who cares? You would never find that in an American legal textbook or in any other legal code. This is not history. Listen to the answer. Shehi mitzvah, it should have started with HaChodesh. Shehi mitzvah rishona shenitztavu ba'Yisrael. Umat tam patach b'bereshit. So why does it start with creation? So this is from Tehillim. Koach ma'asav higid la'amo. Hashem told us about the strength of his creation and everything he did. Why? Latet lahem nachalat goyim. To be able to give them as an inheritance the land of the other nations. What does that mean? She'im, now, you read this, you think it was written today. Listen to the words. She'im yomeru umot ha'olam li'Yisrael. So that if the nations of the world ever by chance come to the Jewish people and say, Listim atem, you? Colonists. What are you? Imposters. Genocidal Jews. Who are you? You don't belong here. Shekavashtem alzot shivat amim. You stole this land. This used to belong to the 7 nations. You're a bunch of stealers. You're a bunch of fill in the blank. Hem omrim lahem kol haaretz. Oh, so what is our response? Circles back to the beginning to our marketing. Our response is not, well, 6 million Jews were killed and therefore we wanted the world to have compassion. That is not true. Because if that's the answer, they're right. Just because you lost your house doesn't mean you get to occupy mine. You understand? I can feel very bad for you. Doesn't mean that I have to give you my house. That is the wrong response. That is not true. We didn't come to Israel because we were homeless. We didn't come to Israel because we were burned in gas chambers. That's not why we came. We didn't come because there were resources there. We didn't come, that's not why we came home. Ella. What do we answer? Hem omrim lahem kol haaretz shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We tell them, hold on a second. You're calling us occupiers? Let's explain to you the rules of the game. You see this whole world? The world belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This world, and you should know, by the way, our enemy is not a godless people. Unfortunately, in this story, we come out godless. They're not godless. You should know, I watched a show, and it was very sad to me. It's a show I recommend watching, so I'm going to tell you. It's called Fauda. It gives you insight, tremendous insight, into how personal the conflict between the Jews and Arabs really is. Brothers and sisters and cousins, and how, don't hate me for saying it, but how similar in the end of the day we are. Because ultimately we are the children of Avraham Avinu, and we are cousins. And we are the cousins who unfortunately can never get along. What do we say? Oh, so I'm telling you about Fauda. So every scene before the suicide bomber goes out, he first goes to the mosque, he washes his hands and feet, he prays, he goes to the imam to get a blessing. And unfortunately, every time you see the Israelis going out on some kind of mission, it's they're smoking cigarettes and they're hanging out with their girlfriends. And chas v'shalom, I'm not saying that. Okay, the Jewish people are good people. We're a holy people. We have soldiers of the highest caliber. Yes, I'm simply saying we're not dealing with a godless enemy. They understand that this fight is not just a piece of land. We don't understand it. And our response really is, hold on. The whole world belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The world belongs to him. You want to know how we know that? Because the Torah starts with creation. It doesn't start with a legal text. Hem omrim, what do we say? Hu bara, he's the one who creates. Unetana lasher yashar beinav, and he gives it to the one that he chooses. Birtzona natna lahem. It's true. In his will, he gave it to the 7 nations. Uvirtzono natlam mehem v'natna lanu. And with the same will that he had given it to them, he took it from them and he gave it to us. And I think that this is one of the most critical pieces you'll hear, which is, this is not us going to throw people out. And this is not us now ethnically cleansing the land. It's understanding that as a Jewish nation, we have a homeland. And a homeland has to be operational. It has to protect the citizens that live there. Do we have room for foreigners? Of course we do. We have books and books that discuss, well, how do we have people who are not Jewish live in the borders of Israel? What do they have to do? How do we make it work? And in fact, today we have 2 million plus Arabs who live in the land in Israel who enjoy the benefits of being citizens. Could we do better? Of course, any nation could always do better. But we already do great. But I think, again, we're talking about Pesach. Pesach is a national holiday. And part of celebrating the nationhood of the Jewish people and the Torah, which we're going to get to on Shavuot, has to come around not just celebration of our homeland, but the reclaiming of it. Because a nation in exile like the Kuzari says, you're a despised people. How could it be that you are the most glorious nation on the world when you don't even have your own homeland? And part of our job on Pesach is to reclaim that. To reclaim our dedication, one, to our nationhood, regardless of our backgrounds, or I should say because of our backgrounds, because we all come from idol worshippers. We all come from slavery. Embrace our nationhood, embrace the Torah, and embrace the idea that the Jewish people are allowed to have a homeland, have to have a homeland, have to protect their homeland, so that, God willing, we could become the nation like the whole point was. We could become the nation who then learns how to create a functional society that then can teach the rest of the world, come and join us. Ki beti bet tefillah lekol ha'amim. The ultimate goal of creating a functional Jewish society is so that we can then teach the world, come and see. Come take the good from here and adopt it to your communities. Because we also want a world that's beautiful. We also want a world that lives in peace. We're not looking for a selfish geula. We're not looking to leave Egypt only that the oppressed becomes an oppressor. That's not us. That's just another side of slavery staying. We're looking to take our nationhood and really turn it into a light. And I'm asking you, God willing, this Pesach, with all the things that you're busy with, take the time to think about, what does it mean for me as an individual to be a part of a nation? And God willing, I'm looking forward to meeting you. On the other side, we still have time to be able to bring the Korban Pesach and to eat together, to meet you on Har HaBayit, where we're going to be able to really say, Min HaZvachim u'Min HaPsachim, that we're eating together, we're loving each other, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we will have a Chag Kasher V'Sameach when we get there.